welcome to PSY 7103 Research Methods Week 7 assignment with Dr. Joel B. Goodin. That's me. Here we have an assignment to interpret qualitative and quantitative research studies. So I've copied all this text and I'm going to pull it over into a Word document. So let's blow it up a little bit and start sort of deconstructing what you need to do. You'll now acquaint yourself with the key differences between qualitative and quantitative research. You should have been reading about this, but mainly qualitative means the data are words. Quant means the data are numeric. It's a very sort of reductive, simplistic explanation. And there's a lot more to what qualitative research, what that means in terms of using words instead of using numbers. And sometimes you'll find some crossover, even without it being a mixed method study. For instance, a qualitative case study might use some descriptive statistics. We won't get into all the possibilities right now. This assignment will have two tasks, and you will combine both parts into one document for submission. Don't send me two documents. Just one. Alright, for the first part of this task, in your own words, explain the difference between continuous versus categorical variables, and, secondly, nominal data versus interval data. So what you want to do is say continuous versus categorical, and have sort of a section here. And then here it asks for include examples to support your findings. Okay, so basically this is the structure you should use. You're going to do the same thing with nominal versus interval data. Here I should have said between. Again, you want to cite a source to show like where you're getting your information. It should not be a direct quote. You should paraphrase here, because direct quotes do not show me any evidence of comprehension. So you definitely want to paraphrase to show that you understand. Put it in your own words, even if your words are not yet very sort of developed in terms of scholarly language. You want to do your best, and obviously avoid plagiarism. So show your own comprehension. The difference between nominal and interval data is, and then again an example of nominal data is, and then an example, or you can say in contrast again. Okay, so that's really what you're doing there. So you'll need to look at your resources to Be certain about what these differences are. If you fail to do that, you won't be able to explain the difference. Generally, continuous variables tend to be numeric and be more than 4, generally 4 or more. So it's sort of like categories, but the numbers actually mean something. Whereas in categorical variables, you're sort of putting people in terms of high risk, low risk, moderate risk, things like that that may have meaning. Nominal versus interval, you'll want to discuss how nominal is sort of similar to categorical, but the naming convention, the category you're using for a nominal variable truly has no quality in terms of one category being more or less than the other, like high risk versus low risk. There's one that's a higher risk, whereas white versus black, or I don't know, thinking of an example, Honda versus Toyota, unless we're working for one of those companies, we're not going to say that they're just different brands, right? We're not stating that one is better than the other. And then you'll want to get into what interval data is, and just talk about how it may be similar to continuous, but what the difference is with interval data. Include examples to support your findings. We've already talked about that. For part 2 of this task, select 2 articles you used in the annotated bibliography assignment. I'm going to say, for me at least, you can use articles outside of the AB assignment, which I believe was week 2. I could be wrong about that. And the other thing to note here is that make sure your articles, I think we need to, well, let's do this. So you need one article that is purely qualitative. You'll search for words like perceptions, explore, lived experiences, understand. You'll avoid words like influence, relationship, as in between variables, factors, variables. So for the quantitative study, you want an article that is purely quantitative. You're basically going to do the opposite. So this is indicative, and also obviously look in the article in the methodology section to see if it says quantitative or qualitative. If it says mixed methods, avoid it, because that's not going to work well for this study. If all the examples in your AB, your annotated bibliography, are of the same type, like they're all qualitative or all quantitative, you need to maybe look into some other literature to at least find one pure qualitative article and one pure quantitative article. So for the qualitative article, explain how the study was carried out and identify. So first, I don't know why we got such big text all of a sudden. How the article was carried out, that's what did the study do, what happened, how was data collected and analyzed, from whom. And that really gets into this next part. Identify the type of qualitative research that were used to collect and analyze the data. So, research techniques. So, were interviews used? Focus groups? Did they use a sort of a qualitative questionnaire? You know, generally, I encourage interviews, but other researchers are going to do their own thing. But at the dissertation level, I normally ask my students to avoid focus groups because there's sort of less control over confidentiality, which is sort of a big deal. And it also takes a little bit more mastery to perform a focus group than to perform an interview. And as you're sort of learning at the doctoral level, we encourage interviews. So qualitative questionnaires, these are fine, but I also discourage them because they generally are going to not elicit or obtain as much data from a person. So imagine if a person's writing, it depends on what the topic is. In an interview, you can sort of prompt people and sort of ask more and clarify, and they can sort of talk more freely and hopefully in more depth, more information about you know, whatever you're asking about. They can sort of elaborate. Whereas a qualitative questionnaire, they're likely to cut short what might have been elaborated. And there's no sort of organic prompting that you can do to say, I don't quite understand, can you tell me more about that? So these are generally ixnay. But, you know, for a dissertation, for instance, but your studies may include them anyway. Interviews. So these are typical for a qualitative study. Qualitative research techniques. They might also include sort of a computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software like NVivo. Should put EG. They're not paying me, so I'm just going to use them as an example. So NVivo is a very common one, probably the most common, and you probably want to sort of look into whatever your university is providing you with for free if you're doing your own. But in terms of what the study that you're reviewing did, they probably used something like NVivo. Maybe they didn't. So what type of analysis, what type of coding, these are things to note that you can say these are qualitative research techniques used to collect and analyze the data. They might mention Yin as an author who has a stage process. So whatever they mention, you want to sort of identify that and show that you're starting to understand how qualitative research works. For the quant article, explain how the study was carried out. So again, we're just going to grab this info. And note that the quant bullet here asks for a little bit more. So let's look at that. Was carried out. Identify all variables assessed and measured. And then you want to insert a list of the variables. Then so it's these options you want to sort of identify, and hopefully why you are sure that it is either continuous, categorical, nominal, or interval for each variable. So it's easy to sort of look up I mean, I encourage you to use the sources. I like Laird a lot, just on a personal level. They don't pay me either, but use what we have in the course. But also, if you need a little bit of extra help, and your course instructor can often help you. Here we're explaining, Laird is explaining what a nominal variable is. Let's see if they have, yeah, interval. Variables for which their central characteristic is that they can be measured along a continuum and they have a numerical value. So the difference between 20 and 30 degrees Celsius is the same as, so 10 degrees between 30 and 40. However, temperature measured in degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit is not a ratio variable. So what is a ratio variable? It's an interval variable. So it's a type of interval variable, but with the added condition that 0 indicates that there is 0 of that variable. It is a true 0. So whereas 0 degrees Fahrenheit is not the absence of temperature, if I was to say I have 0 motivation today, and on a scale from 1 to 10, I'm at 1, which is listed as no motivation at all, then, or 0 to 10 we'll go with, then 0 is the absence of motivation, or how I was trying to think of a better example. Kelvin does, the temperature as measured by Kelvin does have a true 0. It's an absolute 0. Height. How tall is the floor? Well, it is 0 inches tall, because the floor essentially is the absolute 0. Mass. Something has no mass. How far is it from me to my hand? Well, since my hand is included in me, it's 0 distance. 0 miles. Name ratio reflects the fact that you can use the ratio of measurements. And I think nominal, interval, and then we were talking about categorical or continuous. Categorical variables are also known as discrete or sometimes qualitative variables. but they can be included in quantitative research, so I want to be clear about that. Categorical variables can be further categorized as either nominal, ordinal, or dichotomous. So, which ones are categorical? Well, nominal are types of categorical variables. Dichotomous also would be categorical. In other words, they include categories. So you say, well, you're in group 1 versus group 2 and 3, and it may mean something or it may not, depending on what you're studying, the categorization. Again, with nominal, there's no intrinsic order. For example, a real estate agent could classify their types of property into distinct categories such as houses, condos, co-ops, or bungalows. And while individuals might say, well, I like bungalows best, somebody else might say houses are best. But the type of property is not essentially meant to say, well, I'm going to call this a house because it's best. You're calling it a house because of the features, because of the characteristics of the property. It has 4 categories: houses, condos, co-ops, and bungalows. Of note, the different categories can also be referred to as groups or levels of the nominal variable. We're going to see this word levels now and then. Another example of a nominal variable would be classifying where people live in the U.S. by state. And while individuals have different perceptions of which states are better, as researchers, we're not trying to say better. We're just trying to locate you, to try to say, okay, what area of the U.S. do you live in, or what state, or what city, or it's like, what's your phone number, and saying, obviously, we're not going to judge you based on your phone number being better or worse. They're all just sort of, oh, you have this zip code. Okay, that puts you in a nominal category that does not implicitly have any evaluation of quality. So I hope that helped a bit. Here we're trying to sell it. By the way, if you ever need this, this is, in my opinion, pretty fair priced. If you're going to do a quantitative study, especially, which requires some analysis, you know, you can, to me, $13 is pretty good. And I'm not saying that to push you towards this. I just think it's a fairly priced resource. They have a lot of good information. A lot of it's free, but if you're going to do a statistical study, it's good to maybe have access to everything. So I wanted to explain that a little bit more and get into what interval was a little bit further than I did earlier in the video. So the only thing to note here is that title and reference pages don't count. So if you have 3 pages but you add a title page and 1 reference page, then you still don't have enough. So generally the way I feel about sort of page minimums is if you can't meet the minimum, you're probably misunderstanding the level of elaboration required for the assignment. This is generally what I see. Or you're not just misunderstanding it, maybe you're in a hurry. But that shows just a lack of sort of perhaps effort or understanding in terms of making sure you do everything you need to do. Your assignment should demonstrate thoughtful consideration of the ideas and concepts presented in the course. So your examples, for instance, of qualitative and quantitative, nominal, interval, continuous, categorical need to all be sort of thoughtful, insightful, related directly to this topic. Your response should reflect scholarly writing and current APA standards. Don't avoid direct quotes, but if you must use one, make sure you include the page number and the proper citation. Even for everything that you paraphrase, all claims need to be paraphrased and cited if there is a source that you used to paraphrase from. Be sure to adhere to the NCU academic integrity policy. In other words, do not pass off information from other people as your own idea. And don't pass off your opinion as coming from a source that that did not support your opinion. And so always just be clear about what is your opinion and what is something paraphrased from a source, and identify the source. Thank you very much. I think you can do this assignment pretty, I don't know about easily, but I think you can be fine with it. One thing I'll finally note before I close up is that, I would just make this a different section instead of this is a nominal variable, this is a interval variable. I'd explain why. And that shows your instructor or professor, look, I know what I'm talking about. I've learned this material, instead of just sort of doing it and getting it done. Thank you very much. See you later.